Welcome to Bad at Goodbyes. Each week on our show, we spotlight species from the IUCN Critically Endangered Red List. These are plants and animals with decreasing populations, nearing the edges of extinction. We'll share species research, information, and conservation proposals. And then we'll spend a chunk of the show opening a space for contemplation and awe. We'll perform a kind of soundscape of gentleness and reflection and maybe grieving. There's a very low likelihood that any of these species will survive the 21st century. And so perhaps we might acknowledge their passage with a moment of our attention, a recognition of our kinship, and with a commitment to personal and systemic change. Thank you for listening. On today's show, we consider the caseyi's Larkspur. The caseyi's Larkspur is a critically endangered perennial herb native to the Kyrenia Mountains in northern Cyprus. It's an island in the east of the Mediterranean Sea. The caseyi's Larkspur has an erect growth form, reaching heights of up to 3 feet tall. Plants are categorized into 3 general growth forms: erect, semi-erect, and trailing. In our recent episode about the graceful spiderhead, we learned about trailing plants. These are plants that spread horizontally rather than growing upward. They hug the ground with branches that spread out sideways, often laying on the ground itself or growing just above it. Other examples of trailing plants that you may be familiar with are spider plants, pothos, and petunias. Semi-erect plants have stems that initially grow upright, but then may bend downward or spread outward. So these are like ferns, many rose species, and forsythia. Plants with an erect growth form, like our caseyi's Larkspur, grow upright with a sturdy vertical stem. Common examples include trees, sunflowers, and bamboo. The caseyi's Larkspur's basal leaves, that's B-A-S-A-L, these are the leaves connected to the lowest section of the stem, the base, basal. The caseyi's Larkspur's basal leaves are divided into 3 to 5 lobes, kind of resembling a palm leaf, and they can grow up to 8 inches long, emerging from the base of the plant on long stalks. Farther up the stem, leaves become smaller and have shorter stalks. Between May and June, a long, slender stem shoots up from the base of the plant, growing upward and bearing a dozen or more buds that develop into these lovely, deep violet flowers, each covered in fine hair. These flowers have an interesting form. Each individual flower has a long spur. A spur is a backward pointing, hollow, elongated extension of one of the petals. So it's like a long, narrow pouch whose primary function is to hold nectar. And the length of a flower's spur often corresponds to the tongue length of its primary pollinators. So only insects with tongues long enough to reach the nectar at the end of the spur can effectively pollinate the plant. So this is an adaptation that increases the efficacy of pollination by making the nectar accessible only to particular pollinators. The plant increases the chances that its pollen will be successfully transferred. In the case of the Casey's larkspur, its primary pollinators are thought to be the long-tongued bees native to its habitat. Once successfully pollinated, the flowers produce seed-bearing fruits. I could not find conclusive information on how these seeds are distributed, but given its similarity to other Delphinium in its genus, we can make some hypotheses. Delphinium produce dry fruits. These are pod-like structures that split open when mature, releasing the seeds, and so many Delphinium rely on ballistic dispersal, called ballicory, which means that the pods explode open, flinging their seeds away from the parent plant. The wind may then carry some of these seeds farther, and the slopes of their mountain habitat might also affect dispersal, so gravity helping carry the seeds further downhill. The Casey's larkspur is exclusively found in a very specific and limited habitat within the Kyrenia Mountains of northern Cyprus. This mountain range runs roughly 100 miles east to west near the Mediterranean coastline. The Casey's larkspur favors the higher elevations in the western portion of these mountains. It's generally found between 2,500 and 3,000 feet above sea level, and in only 2 remaining locations, one near Mount Selvili and the other further east near St. Hilarion Castle. Together, these populations covering a total of less than 1.25 square miles. This is an eastern Mediterranean conifer sclerophyllous broadleaf forest bioregion. And so that means that the forests of this region are populated by conifers, cone-bearing trees, sclerophyllous plants, which are a type of vegetation that has hard, leathery leaves adapted for water conservation, like sage, rosemary, and thyme. And also broadleaf trees, so like an oak or a maple, and in the case of this Kyrenia mountain habitat, Mediterranean cypress and golden oak. This ecosystem is characterized by hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. Summer temperatures can reach highs into the 90s, while winter temperatures rarely drop below freezing, usually dipping into the low 40s at most. Annual rainfall averages around 20 inches, with most of it falling between November and March, and the summer months, June, July, and August, often see little to no rain at all. The Kyrenia Mountains developed roughly between 250 million years ago and 20 million years ago, pushed up by a collision of the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. And so the landscape is rocky, rugged, with steep slopes and cliffs of exposed limestone, and it's all shallow soils. The caseyi larkspur, preferring full sunlight, often finds purchase in crevices and fissures within these rocks, and then its root system grows deep to find moisture on these dry, exposed mountainsides. It shares its habitat with Caicos buttercup, griffin vulture, Cyprus sweet vetch, Cyprus cedar, bumblebee, lopsided onion, Cyprus mountain tea, long-legged buzzard, St. Hilarion cabbage, Cyprus giant fennel, Benelli's eagle, leafcutter bees, Cyprus crocus, Kyrenia germander, Cyprus poppy, Venus sage, Egyptian fruit bat, Cyprus pink, and many, many more. In the dream, as is true in life, to be alone need not be lonely. Like what I wouldn't give for a day unbothered, quietly stretching my limbs toward the sunlight. In the dream, in plant time, it's not days, it's seasons, it's years, untroubled by machine and the hungry. A small, protected place to safely grow. What a rare and tender dream that is, for a place to safely grow. In the dream. So I don't have the geopolitical knowledge or expertise to properly explain or unpack this, but Cyprus is a divided island. The south is governed by Greece, and the north, including the caseyi larkspur's habitat, is governed by Turkey, following the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974. Eventual peace talks led to the establishment of the Cyprus Buffer Zone. This is a 112-mile-long, 1 to 4 mile wide neutral expanse between the north and south of the island, overseen by U.S. peacekeepers. There are areas of the buffer zone which have gone basically untouched by human activity for the last 50 years. With plant and animal life retaking homes and buildings, and biodiversity is thriving. I share this because, one, photographs from the buffer zone are uncanny and can be really beautiful, and a reminder of the resilience and potential for regrowth and rewilding of Earth's flora. So I encourage you to look up images of this area. And two, This militarized instability has historically complicated research and conservation efforts of Cyprus native species, like the caseyi larkspur. The remaining population of the caseyi larkspur faces a range of anthropogenic threats. Anthropogenic just means human-caused. Historically, habitat loss and degradation due to expanding human settlements and infrastructure have reduced its range. And so construction projects, specifically like the installation of a military communications array in the late 1970s, directly destroyed a large portion of the Mount Salavili subpopulation. And today, limestone quarrying in the Kyrenia Mountains is disrupting the region's ecosystems in general. Caseyi larkspur is also threatened by overgrazing. Goats grazing in the mountains will eat young larkspur plants, consume the flowers before they're pollinated, and trample their habitat, hindering both growth and reproduction. And human-induced climate change is forecasted to result in hotter, drier conditions on Cyprus, leading to longer and more frequent drought conditions in this already arid place. The caseyi larkspur is legally protected in the EU, and one of its subpopulations is within the Kyrenia State Forest. This is a designated wilderness. The Cyprus Wildlife Research Institute has been collecting larkspur seeds and keeping them in the Cyprus seed bank to eventually facilitate their reintroduction into native habitats. In 2022, the Cyprus Seed Bank collected and saved over 2,000 caseyi larkspur seeds. And in 2023 and 2024, the organization completed a major project to fence around the St. Hilarion subpopulation to protect it from grazing. Their informal observations suggest the successful establishment of new individuals and a possible uptick in the caseyi larkspur's population. Nevertheless, the caseyi larkspur has been considered critically endangered on the IUCN Red List since 2006, and their population is generally in decline. Our most recent counts estimate that less than 70 caseyi larkspur remain in the wild. Information for today's show about the caseyi larkspur was compiled from the Journal of Environmental Science and Engineering B, 4, number 3, Cyprus Wildlife Research Institute, The Guardian, July 2024, TOP Biodiversity 2010 Conference Proceedings, the Journal of International Scientific Publications, Ecology and Safety, Volume 10, from the IUCN and the IUCN Mediterranean Islands Plant Specialist Group, from Dr. Elizabeth Ritter's doctoral dissertation from the Arizona State University, and from Wikipedia. If you are interested in learning more about current Casey's Larkspur conservation efforts, consider following the Cyprus Wildlife Research Institute on Instagram at Cyprus Wildlife, all one word. So in a moment, I would like to perform some music in hopes of opening a space to contemplate the other lives with whom we share our earth. I want to state first specifically that this music is not intended to extract meaning from the Casey's Larkspur or put meaning upon it. Instead, I want this music to be an expression of awe and to be a moment to consider my own relationship to other life, particularly life with dwindling populations. And so I will sit in the space of sound and awe and reflection, and I warmly invite you to join me. I honor the life force of the caseyi Larkspur. I will endeavor to hold its human name in my record. I am so grateful to have shared time on our planet with this beautiful being. And I lament the ways in which I and my species have harmed and diminished this species. And so in the name of the caseyi Larkspur, I pledge to reduce my consumption and my carbon footprint and my wastefulness. I pledge to acknowledge and attempt to address the costs of my actions and inactions. And I pledge to ever resist the harm of any plant or animal kin or their habitat by individuals, corporations, and governments. I forever pledge my song to the witness and memory of all life, to a broad celebration of biodiversity, and to the total liberation of all beings. This has been Bad at Goodbyes. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's take care of each other and all of our kin. Goodbye.